Welcome. So, it's the year 2001, the start of this century, and Vodafone in Greece, Athens, received some complaints by some customers that they can no longer receive text messages. So Vodafone starts to investigate this, and after several months, they are still unable to find the source of this problem. So they sent the firmware of the telephone switch to Ericsson. And they also did some research, also took a couple of months. And at the end of their research, they found that the original firmware was modified. It contained like 6,000 extra lines of code. And those lines of code were only there to copy phone calls from like 100 government officials to unregistered prepaid telephones. So the firmware is programmed in the programming language called Plex, which is supposedly only spoken by around 10 guys in the world. It's an old programming language from the 1970s. Nobody uses it, only Ericsson for a specific type of telephone switch. So, well, an all kind of thing happened after they made this news public. The network manager from Vodafone Greece hanged himself under mysterious circumstances the day after the news became public. And until this day, we don't know for sure who was behind this attack, but everything points to the US government. So, my name is Daan Keuper. I'm a security specialist at Pine. And the reason I'm telling this story was because that was one of the stories from my youth. And when I was young, I was interested into computing. That was one of the stories that got me into hacking. I wanted to know how I could hack a telephone system or a mobile phone or a web application or maybe one of your servers. So that was my quest. I followed a security master. I have security as a hobby. I did some competitions. And currently I'm working for a company called Pine, which was recently bought by Computest. And what we do is we help customers answer their security questions. We only do technical security stuff, so no ISO certification, etc., all the boring stuff. If you want something broken, then you come to us. We also do some performance testing, where we test how your application scales, which is also applicable for today, and we do some test automation. So, for today, we do a lot of vulnerability assessments for our customers. And vulnerability assessments are security tests with a predefined scope. And often we see that the customer already knows what we are going to find. It's either a new application that they built from scratch with well-known, well-researched frameworks, with good developers. So they know, okay, they're not going to find any major issues like SQL injection or something. It will be minor issues, but it will be enough so that we can show our management, okay, we also got security covered. The other option is that some guys want to replace a legacy system, and they hire us to do a security test on it so that we can show the management, okay, this system is so broken, you need to replace this. Actually, you want to see what you don't know. You want to know what the blind spots are in a company. Yeah? So, for example, we once found an FTP server with some guy's porn stash on a company's FTP server. Or we found a hidden admin interface that if you entered the wrong password 15 times, the system would log you in as an admin user because you tried so hard or something. So you want to test the blind spots, and we call that red teaming. That means we have no scope, we just attack a specific company. And that's of course also what cyber criminals do. They have no scope, they don't deliver a report at the end of it. They just hack what they think is they can monetize, and they can make money with it. So for today, I'd like to tell you something about what kind of vulnerabilities we still find in modern corporations. And I'll give you 5 tips of advice that you should be taken care of. And these are just basic stuff. And the problem is we still find basic stuff when we test security at companies. So no deep technical talk today, but I'm going to show you guys what cyber criminals do to gain access to your company, and give you 5 tips to protect yourself. Yeah? If you have any questions, just shoot. So, who knows who this is? Some of the people in the audience are older than me, so this is John Jabbar. He was one of the first hackers. He found out that if you have a Captain Crunch, which is a kind of cereal, if you have a whistle from Captain Crunch, that was one of the gifts that they sent in the package, it would emit a tone at exactly 2600 hertz, which was the signal that was used by AT&T switches to switch into operator mode. So when you made a phone call and you blew this whistle, you would actually be an operator in the switch, and you could forward your call, or etc., etc. Basically, you could hack your phone systems of your telephone company. So that was all. No harm was done. Yeah. Same goes for the early PC viruses. For example, this is the Walker virus, and would just be a man walking on your screen for several seconds, and then an hour later he will come back. No harm was done. Actually, this is the brain virus. It's one of the first viruses for the PC. In the source code, you actually see the name and address and phone number of the guys who wrote it. It's from Brain Computer Services, and if you look at the address in Google Maps, this is what you see. They're still there. This is still the company Brain software. These are Basit and Amjad, the original inventors of the virus, and they also still own that company. Actually, these are the criminals we are looking for today. This is, Sam Jain, that was his name. He made around 15 million with developing scareware and malware, and he is on the run since 2009. Interpol is still looking for him. This is Punch. He is 27. He's actually younger than me. Made $50,000 each month. Currently, he's in jail because, well, we'll get to that later. He has a brand new Porsche. And as you can see, he's very happy with that. Was arrested in 2013, and he's in jail for the next 7 years. He wrote the Blackhole Exploit Kit. The Blackhole Exploit Kit is a piece of software that once a user visits a page that has this software installed, will look for known vulnerabilities in your system. Yeah, so it will look if your virus, your browser is up to date, if Windows is up to date, if your Flash player is up to date, etc., etc. If one of those things is outdated, it will serve you an exploit for a specific vulnerability that you're vulnerable to. Since then, it has been replaced with the Angular Exploit Kit, but it has the same working. These are real companies. The Blackhole Exploit Kits came with an installation manual. It comes with 27 support via live chat. They will actually help you set up your illegal business. And they will do that to install malware. For example, this is a CryptoLocker, which is very popular nowadays. It will encrypt your entire drive, and you have to pay a small amount of money to get your data back. My guess is that in the next few years you will see that it will look if the data is actually valuable for a company. For example, last week there was a hospital in America, and it got all the medical information encrypted with these kind of viruses. This virus only asks for 100 euros. Yeah, for a hospital that's absolutely that's nothing. So they will encrypt all your files. Most specifically your backups. It will look for backup disks, so they can encrypt that as well. With, just AES encryption, 265 bits. Just to give you an imagination of how big that number is, this is 265 bits. And if I can try 1 trillion amounts of guesses per second, yeah, this will be the amount of centuries it will take before I have every combination. So, of course, not everyone wants to make this malware and also install this. Well, actually, some people don't want to make the malware, but they don't want to sell it or want to install it. So you now have ransomware as a service. The guys will write malware for you. You can give it a specific node, amount of money you want, etc., etc., and you can just download the malware sample. Yeah? So you can install that with somewhere. These are all based on, this all uses the exploit kits, which uses public vulnerabilities. Same goes with the company that was behind the Panama Papers leak, Mossack Fonseca. That was most likely hacked by an outdated WordPress version. Yeah, there was a WordPress plugin that was outdated. They got remote code execution from that, and from there they got access to all the data. So, first rule of advice, please stay up to date. Yeah, everybody knows this, but we still see a lot of services, clients that ignore updates, etc., etc. And please don't forget the plugins for your favorite CMS system. Yeah, those are important as well. Okay, but not all vulnerabilities are known. Yeah, we also have vulnerabilities that are still unknown to the general public. We call those O days, 0 days. Yeah? So some companies actually buy 0 days and they sell them to governments because governments can use that for cyber espionage. This is one of those companies. So a mobile exploit goes for around 100K. Java, well, that's actually worth nothing nowadays. iOS is worth the most. They will give you $1 million for an iOS exploit, full jailbreak. And they are not only used for governments, they're also used by cyber criminals. For example, who knows the company Hacking Team? Not personally, okay. So Hacking Team made cyber espionage software for governments. It's a company based in Italy. And last year they got hacked, pretty badly actually. And the guy who did it actually made a nice write-up and pasted it on the internet. So he tells us how he hacked Hacking Team, which was quite an interesting read. So what he first did is he found a 0 day in the company's VPN server. Yeah, so that was his first hop to the inside. And from there, he could just move freely into the network because they had no segmentation, etc., etc. So I could just connect to the backup service and get some admin credentials from there, etc., etc. This is Max Vision, aka Iceman, and he first hacked government systems by a 0 day he found in the Bind DNS server. He later started collecting credit card numbers, and he did that by hacking point-of-sale terminals by a vulnerability he found in a VNC server. So he could remotely take over a point-of-sale terminal, then he could just install some malware and he could capture credit card data. This guy was actually a pretty good entrepreneur because at the time there were 3 cardless markets, like internet forums, where you could sell and post credit card numbers, sell and buy. And he wanted to be one of them, and actually he wanted to be the biggest. So what he did, he hacked all 3 other cardless forums. He made a new one, and he copied all the data into his new forum, and then he placed a message on the forum saying, okay, all the other ones are closed, but we have merged into this new one. And in one weekend, he was the owner of the biggest cardless forum on the internet. He made more than 80 million doing so. The guy on the right wrote a book about it called Kingpin. It's actually a very fun book to read. His name is Eric Paulson, of Kevin Paulson, and he is also a famous hacker because he once found a zero-day vulnerability in some telephone switches used by his telecom provider. And there was a radio station that offered a Porsche to the guy who was like the 120th caller for that day. So he hacked the telephone company and he disconnected all lines, so he made sure that he was the 120th caller and he got himself a Porsche, but he got arrested for that. So, anybody know who the guy in the middle is? I think he's the most famous. One guy? Yeah, Kevin Mitnick. Yeah, correct. One of the first hackers that got convicted. So, there are vulnerabilities that you cannot protect yourself against because they're simply unknown to the public. Yeah, you cannot install patches or something. So, if you get hacked, you have to make sure that the impact is minimal. So, add segmentation to your network. You can do that on VLAN level. Also make sure that you don't run multiple services on a single host. We always say if you have a hacker who has local access, he will also get root access. Just a simple fact, because the attack surface is so large that given enough time and motivation, he will get away to escalate to root privileges. And some services are possibly so sensitive that you should also not install them on the same hypervisor. Because we'll look at the Venom bug of last year, which allowed you to break out of a guest virtual machine into the hypervisor, and you could take over other virtual machines as well. So add segmentation to your network. And for some reason, people always forget the backup solution. Most companies have a lot of different VLANs, but they have one backup solution. And the backup solution is accessible from all VLANs. And typically they're not very secure. So if I get access to an internal machine, I would first start looking at your backup service and to see if I can find a vulnerability in there. And most likely, if I have access to the backup service, I will have access to all your data. So that's why you should always make sure that you encrypt the data on the client side before pushing them to the backup service. Yeah? Okay. So this is a famous quote. It's actually the first quote or first sentence from the book from Kevin Mitnick. And we see this happening today. Cyber criminals are willing to invest time in to obscure protocols. Most recently with the SWIFT hacks. I don't know if anybody heard of this, but this is the Bank of Bangladesh. It looks kind of shady to me, but okay. This is the Bank of Bangladesh, and SWIFT is the protocol or system used to transfer money between banks. And they got access to the SWIFT server, and they could wire transfer money, and they did so on multiple occasions. First, they transferred 18 million. They got away with that. Then they wanted to transfer $1 billion, but they got busted for that because they made a spelling mistake, which was a bit dumb. But if you're going to transfer $1 million, that means you have faith in the attack. So probably they have done this more often. And actually, we now know that last year a bank in, I think, London was also hacked. They could also get access to the SWIFT server. They transferred 40 million. After this, they found 3 more banks that got infected with the same kind of malware. So SWIFT is something cyber criminals are really looking into nowadays. This weekend or last weekend, there was a bank in Japan that's during the weekend there were 1,400 malicious transactions. People that will go to an ATM with a stolen credit card, transfer money or take money out of the ATM. So that was a real coordinated attack. You have to have around 1,000 people visit an ATM to withdraw money. That was a big operation. Probably also a large cybercrime organization behind that. Yeah. Okay. I have to speed up, so I'm going to skip a couple of slides. Yeah, so the point I'm trying to make, this one, I'm going to say this one as well. So pirates in Somalia hacked into the CMS system from the shipyard company, so they know which ships to hit and where the sensitive cargo was on board of that ship. On Russian internet fora, you can actually buy access to Fortune 500 companies that they have hacked before. So make sure that you have the ability to detect breaches. If you have been hacked, you would like to know this. So something you could do, for example, is look at canaries. Canaries are little honeypots you can buy. You can drop them in your network. And as soon as they get port scanned or a connection attempt, etc., they will notify you by SMS. Yeah? Something you have to detect if you have been hacked. So I'm going to skip this. What we haven't talked about is reconnaissance. We start always an attack with first mapping all the servers in your system. Something like the certificate transparency project, where I can see all the certificates that are registered for a certain domain. Gives me some insight on what I can find there. For example, public webcams, film in your office, which we actually found during a security test. Just before this presentation, I started looking to some Stack Overflow posts. Was this guy who said, okay, so I have a question, I want to do this. Was a guy who answered it. Okay, so you should do this, but make sure this is a security breach, so you have to do something about this. A couple hours later, the same guy asked us a different question, copied the code, removed all the comments. Okay, so this is my current situation. And just completely ignored the security vulnerability here. And I don't hope that he published this on his corporate website or something. So what we typically do is we look at who is working at your company. Because if we know who is working for your company, we can try generating a password list. Just look at your employers of employment and just write down their favorite football club, name of their kid, parents, partner, etc., and just log in on your webmail solution. Most probably, at least a single employee will have a bad password. Yeah, always guaranteed. And that is, of course, your first way in. If you have an account on the system, then you're in. Because if you're on the internal network, then you can access the file share, etc. Most oftenly, if we are inside, there is no segmentation. This is a sweatshop in India, because if we want to brute force passwords, we often have to solve CAPTCHAs. That's a typical solution. So you can buy CAPTCHA solvers, which are actually people working from home and solving CAPTCHAs for you. They just have an API. And of course, it's all also available on GitHub with code examples, how you can actually use their service. You send them an image, and they will send you the solution back. And if the going rate is, well, for 1,000 CAPTCHAs, you pay 6 cents or so, 60 cents. So, rather cheap also. So, therefore, it's important that you always use strong and unique passwords. Yeah? And if possible, enable two-factor authentication. So, use a solution like 1Password or KeePass or something else. Yeah, something that can generate random passwords for you so that you don't have to store the passwords or remember the passwords or reuse them. So, we also see this is a global problem, of course. And hackers have all kinds of cool tools that they can use to stay hidden. For example, Tor, which also offers great services like you can buy weapons, you can buy a DDoS, with Downtime Guarantee. So if the service isn't... Yeah, so basically you pay for 10 minutes downtime guaranteed. Yeah, so they will use 10,000 bots. If that doesn't work, they will scale up to 20,000 bots, etc., etc. You can buy credit card data. You can order a hitman, of course. You can just, these are the going rates. They will murder somebody with 5 guards for, well. So, of course, Tor is also used for good things for people in China who want to have free internet, etc., etc. But there are also some, well, mysterious services to be found. The other thing is, for example, what they use to cover their tracks is they use satellite connections, hijack satellite connections. This was used by the Turla malware, which is from Russia. And what they do is, if they want to exfiltrate data, they make sure that the compromised system will send the data to a user somewhere in the world that uses a satellite connection. And satellite internet works a little bit like radio. It's just a satellite broadcasting. This is all the data I have for you. And of course, the computer that receives that data will just ignore it because he most likely doesn't, he's not listening for any incoming connection. So he will just drop all the packets. But of course, the cyber criminals can just also put up an antenna and just receive satellite disk and just receive all the data. So how large is the reach of a average satellite? Well, about this big. So if you get hacked and all the data will be sent to a known satellite user, you can look on the internet, well, okay, where was the satellite on that moment? And actually the only thing you can tell is, well, the attacker was somewhere between Egypt and Kazakhstan. We don't know where, but somewhere in this area. So if you get hacked, the attacker is most likely also pretty good at covering his tracks. He can use Tor services, he can use hijacked satellite connections, etc., etc. And he can use that to make sure he is hard to find. That's why you want to make sure that you have as much data as possible you can use for your forensics. And something to remember is that all the logs or data that you have on the system itself that got compromised is more or less worthless, because the hacker can, of course, tamper with all that data. I can delete log messages, etc., etc. So make sure that all your logs go to a remote location. Something like remote syslog or a elk stack or Splunk, etc., etc. Something you can use to detect the impact of a breach. Something else what's important to log is netflow data. So send netflow data to your Splunk or elk stack so that you can see if the attacker also connected to other machines in your internal network. It's all you have so that you can determine the impact of the breach. So that you also know if you need to contact customers or reset passwords or etc., etc. Okay. Actually, those were my 5 rules of advice. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
Hi. This is not really a question. This is more a remark.
Okay.
About Tor.
Yeah.
When you say Tor provides access to assassination market, it's like saying Microsoft is selling the virus that runs on Windows.
Yeah. So, well, no. Okay. So I think there is a need for services like Tor, and there is also a need for anonymity. So I think that it's very good that those services exist. I just want to show you the other secret services you can find on Tor that most people have never heard of or have never seen. And I know that Tor isn't the only one that is offering these services, and also that Tor is not to blame for the content that is available on those services.
Thanks.
Yeah.
More questions? I saw other hands. Yeah.
Do you also use social engineering?
Social engineering is difficult because there's many customers think, okay, if you use social engineering, you will cross the boundary of messing with people's privacy. So if a customer is, actually gives okay for using social engineering, that's certainly possible. But you often see that they will keep things with only on the technical side.
Okay.
More questions?
Is Pine ever hacked itself?
Have we ever been hacked? Not that I know of. But I know for sure. Well, good question. No, I don't think so. We don't have any indications that we have been breached. Let me put it like this.
Good.
Any more? Okay.
Well,
Well,
thanks
thank you.
everyone. That concludes